A lot of times, especially in the schools that we have, teachers are scared to engage in community. They don't live into the community that their students are from. They only come in to go to work and then they get right back on the highway and don't think about it twice. They don't go to their students' events. They're afraid to see them in the supermarkets, and that's harmful. So when I think of a community school, I think of a school that really has all wraparound support and just really engage deeply, elbow deep into the things that are happening in the community, because communities raise our kids.
Welcome to The Exit Interview, a podcast for Black educators. This podcast is more than storytelling, it's archival justice. For too long, the voices of Black educators who have left traditional spaces in education have been silenced, dismissed, or left out of the record. Here, we reclaim that narrative. Every interview is a living archive capturing the wisdom, resilience, and truth of Black educators who have shaped classrooms, communities, and generations. Together, we name the challenges: racial battle fatigue, systemic inequities, the weight of caring too much, but we also honor the brilliance and joy that Black educators bring, the creativity, the innovation, the care, and the deep legacy of resilience. Each episode is both a testimony and an offering, an act of preservation for those who came before, and a guide for those still walking this path today. By listening, you are helping to ensure that these stories are not lost, but held, celebrated, and passed forward. So take a breath, settle in, and join us as we honor the past, uplift the present, and reimagine the future of education together. All right, folks, welcome back to The Exit Interview, a podcast for Black educators. It's me, your host, Dr. Asia. We're back in the studio, and we have, of course, another amazing guest, Candice Renee Person. Welcome to the show.
Hello.
How are you today?
I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, I'm excited. I have to tell you, we've had a little chat before, always beforehand. I talked to the guests, and you had a really fascinating story. So I'm excited for folks to hear your story. Before we dive in, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Okay. Well, my name is Candice Renee Person, and I'm born and raised in Springfield, Massachusetts, the home of basketball, which many people don't know, and Dr. Seuss.
Oh, wow.
Yep. I've been an educator for 20 years. I stumbled upon it, but it just seemed like the right fit for me. And I've taught basically most subjects and most grades from elementary level all the way to high school. I'm a child of an organizer, so I'm an organizer and an activist by heart, and I love to engage in community work. And so that's my passion, to be of service. I have 2 children, a 10-year-old and a 20-year-old. And I don't know, I guess I'm just excited to be here. I'm a dreamer, and I dream about a digital nomad life, and it's a dream that I started to cultivate many years ago, and now I'm mere months away.
Wait, Candice, now don't give it all away. Wait a minute. We want the audience to listen to the end of what the nomad life is. You can't give them all the juice right now.
Well, I'll give them a little taste.
Yes. And I love you have a 10-year-old and a 20-year-old. And every time I hear that gap, I think, whoo, we were out the woods. He was no diapers. We was good to go. And we went right back in. But, you know, that's how it is sometimes. And kids bring joy to our lives most days.
Yeah, they're good. I have some good kids. I'm lucky. I'm blessed.
Oh, that's awesome. So let's go ahead and get started. You were in education, obviously, on the show for that reason. Tell us what made you decide, or who made you decide that education and teaching was for you?
So it's funny because I didn't grow up dreaming of being a teacher. I used to think I wanted to be a community organizer, but I realized they don't really pay that much. I stumbled upon it. So I went to Harvard University, and I was in my senior year trying to figure out if I wanted to go to grad school and what that would look like for me. And a friend told me about a program called New York City Teaching Fellows. And she was like, the application is coming up. You should apply. I was able to make the application deadline right on the nose. I had everything that I needed to apply. And the next thing you know, I'm headed to New York City to do a group lesson and a demo. And I remember it was a lesson about cliches. And it was, you do the fake lesson in front of your peers and they may pretend that they're students. As soon as I got in front of the group, it just something clicked for me. And it just felt like the most natural thing for me to be doing, to teach, because I didn't feel awkward. And I'm a very introverted person, but something about standing up in front of everyone, I just like fell into this naturalness. I was flawed. I was laughing at my own jokes. I was engaging. And it was a really fun and dynamic lesson. And from there, I was like, okay. And I've started to become really excited about the possibility of teaching. And that was kind of my introduction to it. And eventually I was placed, I started teaching in the Bronx. I was a seventh grade special education teacher. And that was one of the hardest years of education I've ever had in my life. I had about 5 to 7 students, all boys, and it felt like 30. I had non-readers. I did not know how to teach students how to read. I had behavior problems. I did not know how to manage the behaviors. But for some reason, I just still felt this drive to be there. And I never felt like this is not for me. Luckily, I had a couple of people who were supportive. I had a strong assistant who had some experience in the field and showed me what family engagement looked like and how that could really change the dynamic of your classroom. And I had a mentor who believed in me and recognized that I wasn't getting the support. I didn't have the resources that I needed to be the best that I could be. And because of them, I stayed. And I realized that, okay, first of all, I'm teaching in New York City. I feel like if you make it in New York City, make it anywhere. I was teaching in a very hard situation. The most resounding message I received from my supervisors was keep those kids in the classroom. So I just felt like I was on an island and I had to figure it out, but I did. And that's kind of what led me to be in education and realize that it's what I wanted to do. And from there, next thing you know, it's 20 years later, and I had taught most subjects as a special education teacher, as an English language arts teacher. I moved to Virginia, I moved to Kentucky, I came back home and came back to Massachusetts and I taught. And so that's kind of what happened. I ended up staying in education for a long time. I had a range of roles. Eventually, I became an administrator. I was a coach.
Well, let me pause you for a second before you get into that, because I want to kind of step back a little bit to your journey as far as like New York City. And actually, I want to go back a little bit further than that. You were graduating from Howard. So this is how far in the story I want to go. Candice is running ahead of me, folks, but I got to slow her down. I have so many questions. So the first thing is, you mentioned that obviously you went to Howard University, you said that, and then you've discovered teaching in this way. What was the conversation with your family when you told them, or community or whoever, that you were going to go into teaching when you didn't go to Howard to become a teacher? What was that conversation like?
I'm a first generation college student. So even the idea of going to Howard University was something beyond. I thought I was going to a state school. I had a full ride to a couple of colleges local to me. But when that acceptance letter came to Howard University, I said, I don't know how I'm going to afford it, but I'm going. So there really wasn't this vision of, well, you're going to go to Howard, you're going to get the most lucrative major and you're going to do this. It was just like, this is something that we've never experienced. And we're just so amazed and grateful that, we're able to do this. So there wasn't that push or kind of like expectation. It was kind of like, figure it out.
As long as you're in college and as long as you finish, we just proud of you no matter what.
And I knew that I wanted to get a master's. Like I always had a 6-year vision for my education, where I do a 4-year degree and a 2-year degree. So I didn't have that luck. I didn't have that pressure to kind of fit into a certain mold. I finished. And I finished within the time that I said I was going to finish. And I had a plan for what was next. So when I said I was going to be a teacher, I didn't receive any negative feedback. It was like, okay, this is what you're going to do. And I think there was a trust coming from a single mom household. And my mother always trusted. She gave me trust. I felt her trust since I was 13, 14 years old. And she believed in the decisions that I made. And so there was always a support there. So it was just like, okay, this is what you're going to do. And there was that support, and as best as she could, and my other family and community members just supported me. So luckily, I didn't have any negative experiences. I remember at one point, my mom even said, my grandmother, she wanted to be an educator. She wanted to go to Cheney State, in Pennsylvania, and she wanted to be an educator, but she wasn't able to do that. But there was never any, it was always positive.
That's awesome. I asked you because there are folks who have the similar story to you. It's like, as long as you're going to school, as long as you're taking care of yourself and you feel really good in your heart about what you're doing, go for it. And then we also have folks who come on the show that say, my parents said you're wasting your brilliance being a teacher, or why would you do that because you're not going to be paid well? And there's always there's conversations around the career move. And so I'm always curious to know how families and communities are supporting the teachers. I think the next question, kind of fast forward, is the New York Teaching Fellows. You finished the program, and how long did it take?
The New York City Teaching Fellows, it's a 2-year program.
So it's a 2-year program, and you come out and you start teaching social education and realize that you're not prepared. What was going on in your mind? I have to know, what were you thinking about when you're like, uh-oh, it wasn't like it was an overnight mail in the information and you get a paper, some kind of like fake degree or fake program. This was intense. 2 years is a long time, but you still felt like you came out and you weren't prepared to support your students. So what was going on in your mind when that was happening to you that you realized that?
Okay, so let me explain how the alternate certification pathways go.
Please do.
They learn as you go. So they don't wait 2 years for you to finish a degree. I started teaching within months of graduating from college.
Okay, got it.
I graduated in May. I moved to New York in July and I started my training, and I did student teaching, which is like summer school. So that might 4 weeks in the middle school classroom where I'm doing student teaching. At the same time, I'm also attending classes. So I'm doing graduate school, because the draw of these type of programs is they subsidize your master's degree. So I'm learning, and when they're saying, oh, we're going to make a lesson plan for our class, it's a real lesson plan that I'm probably going to use class. So within months of me graduating, that following September, I was starting my first day as an educator. And that's why I wasn't prepared, because I didn't have 2 years. By the end of that 2 years, by the end of that first year, I felt like I knew something. In that first day in September, in that first month, I wasn't prepared. And that's how a lot of these programs are designed.
It's interesting that you're describing this, because I feel like even in some people who do a traditional 4-year program, I feel like I still won't be prepared whether you went 4 years in an education program and finished, or you alternative licensing. Like regardless, you're 21, 22, 23, come out of school for many people, if it's a first career, and you're in a classroom and it's like, it's go time, right? But then you're also describing, like you said, special education is a very specific type of licensure and a skill set that people have typically go back to school for or get special training for, lots of different things. So yeah, hats off to you. So you went to New York, you worked there, you started around a lot. Tell us about why the moving around. What were you teaching? What were you doing when you were going from state to state in education?
The intention it wasn't like planned where I was like, I want to teach everywhere. It just so happened that family and life changes. And I believe that everything happens for a reason and you're where you're supposed to be. So I was in my 3rd year of teaching in New York. And at that point, I was in a groove. I was enjoying it. I believe I ended up following my students. So I ended up teaching them from 6th to 7th grade at one point. And I had a couple of co-teachers that were phenomenal. We partnered well. We developed a great collaborative model. We learned from one another. We supported one another. However, it was still difficult for me. And I was missing home. I was talking on the phone to my mother. I remember that it was hot, because New York is great, but when it's hot.
Yeah, I've been there. I've been there in August. It's terrible.
And I was standing at the bus stop and I was like, ooh, I can't stand it. And my mother's like, just come home, Candice. Come home, Candice. And I was struggling and I was missing home, and I just needed more support, because I did cultivate friendships, but nothing's like family.
Sure.
And when she said that, I just felt like relief. I was like, okay. So I made the decision to come back home, and everything happens for a reason. So I came back to Massachusetts and I started teaching at a middle school in a community close to, you probably heard of like Smith College, UMass Amherst. So I moved close in those college towns and I started teaching at a middle school. And that was an interesting experience. And at the same time, I was closer to my mom. And so I got a chance to spend more time with her and my siblings. At that point, my son was 1 or 2 years old.
Mm-hmm.
And so she had the chance to get to know my son and all of those things. But then unfortunately, she passed away unexpectedly in 2007. So within about a year, a little over a year of me being back home, my mother passed away.
Wow. Yeah.
So it was like I needed to be home. You know what I mean?
Sure.
It was
Yeah, for
the reason why
sure.
I came back home. So, but then I felt disconnected. I felt like displaced. Like, this is not home anymore. My mom's not here. What am I doing? And I just felt so lost. Like I said, I'm a child of an organizer, and I always introduced myself that way because my earliest memory is of me marching for fair wages in my neighborhood. And I always used to be one of those little kids that when my mother was organizing, I was in the background playing, listening, maybe participating in some way. And I've always been witness to my mother's organizing work to the point where eventually I organize. I'm an organizer now. And that was a life that I thought I would live. And so when I'm looking around my community and I see all these places and spaces, all I see is this organizing history and this impact, and it just was a lot for me. Yeah. So my brother, he was a student at University of Louisville, and he kept telling me how much of an amazing place it was. I was looking for somewhere that would be good for my son, that would have a lot of enrichment and also still be connected to family. And I just felt so disconnected from Massachusetts. I went to Kentucky because I couldn't be here anymore. So that's how I ended up going to Kentucky. I think for me, it's always searching. I'm always searching. And it's not because I'm unhappy. It's just because there's so much life to experience and to understand and to know. I'm a learner. So I went to Kentucky. And you know what? It's funny because when I moved to Kentucky, at that point, I was like, I'm not teaching anymore because I have other passions. I'm a writer. I always had a vision of myself like creating my own lifestyle and writing being the mode that will allow me to do that. And I've always written short stories as a way of healing and processing. I'm a journaler. So I went to Kentucky and I did not have a job and I didn't know what I was going to do, but it was a great time. It's funny when you think about like people choose teaching a lot of times because of the stability, right? Because you get a check, you get your summers off, you get a pension.
And people won't admit that. They'll say, I love it for the children. And many people do it specifically just for children. But there are some benefits that people don't often talk about that are good in teaching that, like you said, the pension and most pension is not a thing for a lot of careers now. In the summers, maybe you are still doing lesson plans and you're still recuperating, but you do have some time to connect with family and community in the summer. So yeah, I get that.
And a lot of people like to say teaching doesn't pay, but I don't say that. Teaching pays me because I've been doing it for so long and because of my education. It's a very financially comfortable work for me. However, that's not why I stepped away, right? But there was just other things that I wanted to do. And so I was trying to figure it out. But this is the thing. I don't know if you remember 2007, 2008. So in 2008, George Bush was the president and we were in the depths of a recession. I could not find a job to save my life. I could not figure it out. I actually, for a year and a half, I applied and applied. I had a journal, just all these jobs because I'm a lister. And so I had all these jobs. Nope, 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 nope. So I eventually started tutoring and I became an in-home tutor. So once again, I'm back in education, but it was okay, more flexible. I was an in-home tutor, but I also started to volunteer. And I started to volunteer doing some writing work, like some resume writing and some editing work, which I eventually got paid for. And I also volunteer with a nonprofit organization. And I learned a little bit about nonprofit work. So I learned about like press releases and grant writing and pitching your ideas and asking for the things that you want and having these strategic lunches. And it was really cool, like I'm at the top floor, like these fancy hotels, like with these business people. It was really cool. I wouldn't have been able to experience that if I was in education. So I did that for a while. And then I enrolled in college again. So this would be my third time. And there was a program in Louisville, Kentucky at Spalding University called the Low Residency MFA. So Low Residency MFA is a creative writing. Well, it's a fine arts degree. And so the program is a creative writing program. So you can do poetry, screenwriting. I took the fiction track. The low residency MFA means that this was really cool. And this is why I did it. And I'm so thankful. It gave me the opportunity to study in another country every summer, writing and engage in workshop and enrichment and cultural experiences. And then for the following, after you return for the year, you work with a professor and you correspond digitally, or like you send like snail mail and you send your work packets. So you work your writing in your own time, and then you correspond and you send a series of packets that have to have like 20 and 30 pages of writing, critical analysis, creativity, lectures. So I was able to, when I moved to Kentucky and I wasn't teaching, it gave me space to think about all the other possibilities for myself. And if I didn't move to Kentucky and if I was still teaching, I may not have applied to Spalding University program and I might not have explored my creative writing. But because I was in that program, I first went to Argentina for a summer. After that, I went to Italy for the following summer. After that summer, I went to Paris. And then my last summer, I went to Ireland.
First of all of that sounds fantastic. And I just, yeah, I can just imagine is good food and flowy dresses and right? But you're making a really good point about all of the skills and talents that educators have. And I'll speak specifically to Black educators that we have that because we choose teaching and for many of us just stay teaching for 20 years, 15, whatever, we don't quite explore or explore as much as we could all the other skills and talents that we have. And what would it mean for us to even have a 2-year break or a 3-year break from teaching in a dream world where we can afford to pay for it, whatever, and then explore whatever skill, whatever passion that we have. And then we can choose to go back into our classrooms or being deans or whatever, or continue to explore that passion because we are multi-passionate people as human beings, let alone as educators. And I wonder too, and I'm sure you will get to this about how much better we are for our students, for the system of education when we're able to explore these other parts of ourselves for a good chunk of time. You know what I mean? So, yeah. So continue. So you're traveling all over, you finish up, and during this time, you're not teaching at all.
So I eventually did go back after about a year. So after my first year, I was like, okay, I think I can go back. At this point now, remember, I moved to Kentucky when my son was 3. So eventually my son was starting kindergarten. When he was starting kindergarten, I said, all right, maybe I'll go teach elementary. Since my son's going back to school, maybe I can be on the same schedule as him. I started to really value the time that I had with my son. I think that was so powerful. And I had a little bit of that in Massachusetts too, where we got to wake up when we want to wake up. And me and my children, we love libraries. So we explore all the different libraries and the free community events and go to a cafe that has like a play place in the back in the middle of the day. Like take them to the park, go for a walk on a bike path. I loved that. And I wanted more of that. And so when he started school, I was like, well, at least if I'm on his schedule, I can make money, but also still be able to have that same time with him. So I was like, okay. And at this point, I had never taught elementary. I had only taught middle school. So I started interviewing, and I remember the interview that I got the job. And I gave the story. I said, my son's starting kindergarten. I know I haven't taught elementary, but I know that I can do it. I know that I can do it. And they were convinced. And my son started kindergarten, and he went to the same school that I worked at all throughout his elementary experience. We stayed together.
Audience, if you're not on YouTube watching this, you're listening to this on Spotify or somewhere else, Candice is smiling the whole time thinking about her son and this experience. I just have to point that out, and she's just smiling and smiling. He is smiling, and it's making me smile that she's reminiscing on spending time with her son during those times. So I just wanted to point that out, but go ahead.
I really love my children, and being a mother and being present for them is very important to me. So once he started school, I went back. And so I would say a little bit before he went to school, I went back, and then he joined me. So I started teaching special education. I wasn't a self-contained. I'm not sure if you know the difference, but a self-contained teacher has their own unit, and they're usually in a room with a couple of assistants, and they have like their cohort of students that they work with, and those students can be a range of grades and disabilities. When I first went as a special education teacher, I was what you would call a resource teacher. So I would do a lot of pull-out support, or I would collaborate with the general education teacher. So, and I really enjoyed that. So I did that for a while. My son came to my school. My son never rode a school bus all throughout elementary because he rode with my, he had to.
Flex.
Yeah, so I ended up staying in Kentucky for 6 years. So all throughout kindergarten first, by the time he got to 5th grade, and I still kind of stayed in those same roles. But the thing about special education that I have found, and this is one of the frustrations with teaching, sometimes they just treat you like a chess piece. You're in the district, you can go wherever we say. It's all the same company. So I'm in the middle of like, I finish a grading cycle or private support time, and I'm attached to my students and I have all this good data, and they come to me and say, oh, you need to go here now. On Monday, it's Friday. On Monday, you're here now. That happened to me so many times, and it's just like, oh, just kind of turned me off. It's like they're not treating me like a human. So because I had to move, my son had to move because the district policy was, he can go, but it's out of district, but he has to follow the parent. So eventually they switched me from one elementary school to another. And I was really attached to this elementary school. Like, it was a good sense of community. I really enjoyed it. We had so much fun. We went camping together. We had great Christmas parties. We had always a great end of year celebration. It was a nice sense of community. And I was really heartbroken. I was connected to that school. And they put me in a self-contained unit, an autism unit. So a lot of the students had autism. We had students that had Down syndrome. We had students that had other types of disabilities. And the student ages it was an elementary school. So I had a kindergartner and a 5th grader. It was just ranked. And I had 2 assistants. And so what happened was, I remember this is October. I guess the current teacher, she just said, I'm not doing this anymore. So she left. And they needed someone in the classroom, and they decided it was me. And I remember feeling so angry and so resentful because I'm a human. Like, I'm doing this because I want to do this. I chose this job. Why am I being treated this way? I felt like I didn't have a choice. So, and once again, I'm putting in a situation where I'm not equipped. I've never taught this severe of a disability. My degree is moderate disabilities. It's all right. You could figure it out. Moderate. I don't have the certification for this, but in their mind, special ed is special ed.
What does that say about the ways that our education system treats our students and believes in our students and their capabilities, right? By not providing them the resources, the adequate resources they have. Obviously, you're going to show up and do what you need to do and do your best, but they're like, whatever, it's all the same. Speaks to the ways that we as a community need to make sure we advocate for our children, because school systems will not do so.
I'm here for the young people. I'm here for the children. And so I'm always going to do what's in the best interest of the students. So I worked in that unit for 3 years. And over that time, honestly, I got better and better. I'm entering a class and the person quit because the students were not safe. There was biting, there was hitting, there was what they call eloping. And the assistants were frustrated. They're bruised up by kids. And in order to teach in that type of class, you have to have a training. It's like a form of nonviolent self-defense. And you have to update it like every month or every other month, where you go to a class after hours and you learn these moves like pivot. And I can't remember the name of these holds, but like you have basically how to hold students safely so they don't harm themselves or others. You learn how to wrap your legs and arms around them and how to escort them in a safe way without like digging your finger. It's amazing what I had to do. The funniest thing that I always think about when I remember that time is I always still wore my dresses in my flats. Like, I always like little ballerina flats and dresses. And when I got into that class, there would be many days that I'm running down the street in my dress. I'm like, I'm going to be cute. Listen, it is what it is. I have to have something. Like, you took away my choice. But I'm proud of myself because, once again, I didn't give up. But also because that class was amazing by the time I was done with them. I have videos of my students. We have such amazing, like, we would dance and sing, and they were safe. They were reading. I had a student that refused to talk. Nope, I'm not saying a word, but you best believe I was like, oh, you don't want to talk? all right, we're going to match these pictures right here and push these little pecs around. So there was success. It was a powerful time for me, and I learned a lot about myself, about resiliency and what I'm capable of. I developed my leadership skills because my rule in my class, I had two big kind of non-negotiables for myself. I'm not going to ask my assistants to do anything that I don't know how to do well first. And we're always learning. Those were my two non-negotiables. And so no matter what was happening in our class, there's always an opportunity for learning. So even if I had one of my students that needed to be held or hugged on in the back of the room on the beanbag corner and calm down, my assistants knew exactly what to do to keep the learning going at all times. And what happened was it created such a safety and such a powerful experience. And my students demonstrated so much success. We took field trips all over the place. And we had our routines where before we walked out of the classroom, we would look around, we would line up. And I had to have special doorknobs because I had kids that elope. And it's like, you knew who to hold. So you'd be, okay, I got his wrist. Okay, she's standing here. Are we ready, y'all? All right, let's walk. And we would just pat it down. It was a very great success. 3 years in that classroom. And guess what happened? At the end of my third year, my principal, she pulled me into her office and she was mad. And I thought she was mad at me, but she was just angry. She said, you're going to a new placement. They're dissolving your classroom. They're going to split your students up between the other two units and you're going to go somewhere else. And I don't know where that is. So once again, I spent a whole summer not knowing. And then like a couple days before school started, say, oh yeah, you're going to go to this high school. So then I'm in a high school. And then I have a combination of classes. I was teaching algebra, geometry, and English language arts. No special ed, 9th and 10th graders. And they were rotated to my room. I count it as a blessing because that's why I can say things like I've taught most grades in most subjects. However, the way that I kind of was treated as like this pawn that can be shifted and pushed around was so frustrating for me. So I worked there for a bit of time, but I think I was kind of done. That was like my second or third time where he kind of like sprung this thing where it's like, well, you're going here now. You have to move. So I ended up moving. And at that point I was married. I had my daughter and my son was just finishing elementary and it's time for him to go to middle school. So I was like, okay. And Kentucky to Massachusetts is about 800 or 900 miles. It's a 15-hour drive. It's very far. So I wasn't able to see my family often. So we made a compromise of Virginia because Virginia is halfway between Kentucky and Massachusetts. And my husband has some family there. So we moved to Virginia. And that's why I moved to Virginia. And to raise my daughter and son closer to my husband's family. And I started teaching in Virginia. And I stayed in elementary school. But I once again went to being more like a resource teacher where I was doing more pull out and collaboration and co-teaching.
How did that feel you were moving, the timing, it was what it was. How did it feel to be in another classroom and starting all over again in a whole different state? At this point, did it feel like they could move you at any time and not to get comfortable in that place? Or did you feel like, okay, I think give it all a fresh start and maybe it'll just work out? Like, what was your mindset during that time? And what was happening with your writing? Because you have this fine arts degree. So were you still able to do some of the things that you loved, other things that you loved while you were teaching?
So that's the challenge. The writing was not happening. I have to admit, there was some anger at the Kentucky district that I was working at because it was like they didn't treat me right. And it's funny because even when I resigned, it was just like, all right, bye.
Yeah.
There wasn't any kind of like close out or exit interview. I was like, all right, bye. It's like, okay, well. And so I just welcomed the new start and the new opportunity. Virginia is absolutely beautiful. And they really have some good schools. So I was hopeful and excited for the change. So we were there for a while.
Every voice on the exit interview carries wisdom, resilience, and the reminder that Black educators deserve more than survival. They deserve to thrive. At Lions Educational Consulting, we create the spaces where that wisdom lives on in practice. For individual Black educators, our workshops offer room to breathe, to pause, and to rediscover purpose. For schools and districts, our consulting opens pathways to build equity-centered environments that honor Black educators and ensure they are seen, valued, and supported. These conversations don't stop at the end of the podcast episode. They ripple outward into classrooms, into leadership decisions, and into communities that benefit when Black educators are well. You're already a part of this story just by listening. If you're ready to take the next step, whether as a Black educator seeking wellness or as a leader reimagining your school's future, we'd love to walk with you. Connect with Lions Educational Consulting by connecting with me, Dr. Asia, on LinkedIn, or join me on Instagram. Together, let's transform stories into sustainable change. Now let's get back to the interview. So when I talked to you in our pre-chat, we had a conversation about you getting into DEI and really being in a space of like challenging, and that the script was kind of flipped after a while. Is that in Virginia or is it in a different place?
So this is an interesting thing about when you're in the South. And I always say, like I said, I'm an activism and I'm an anti-racist organizer.
Yeah.
They don't have those conversations down there.
Yeah.
It's almost like, well, if I'm not calling you the N-word, then I'm not racist.
Sure.
Even if I did experience, have experiences where it was like, oh, with microaggressions or blatant racism, like at one point I was having a conversation and it was a difficult conversation with a counselor in Kentucky. You're yelling at me. And I said, I'm not yelling. Those type of things. And when I had shared it with other Black colleagues, they'd like, girls, just ignore them. Don't worry about it. You know, it was that edgy. In Massachusetts, we have those conversations. On the East Coast, and even when I spent time on the West Coast, we have those conversations. And we're real about like what the microaggressions and white supremacy organizational culture and what that means for us. It doesn't have to be blatant for it to be harmful. But when I was in the South, those conversations didn't happen. I definitely missed the activism side of me when I was living in Kentucky and Virginia, because that's not where it happened. I moved back to Massachusetts. I finally felt like I could come back home and I needed to come back home because once again, I needed my family. I came back to Massachusetts when my daughter was 2 years old. Unfortunately, Virginia didn't work out and I went through a really difficult time. So I came back home to Massachusetts. And before I came back to Massachusetts, I remember interviewing for schools and I knew I was going to be home and I knew what that meant for me because my community raised me. Like I always remember, my mother was always involved in my schools. And even though my mother was like in elementary, I should say, and I benefited from that. And I see what it's like when a school is really connected to community and what that feels like for me as a child and how it empowers me. But then when I got into middle school and high school, I experienced in schools that were disconnected from community. And so all of my enrichment and my exposure to different experiences came from my local community center. So like I went to the Dunbar Community Center and Dunbar had everything. I went to Dunbar for everything from the time I got into 6th grade all the way up until almost when I graduated high school. And that's where my mentorship came from. That's where my enrichment, that's where I learned my first job, cheer, dance, advocacy. And so when I was coming back to Springfield, I was thinking, I need a school that's going to be engaged in community in the way that community was engaged with me. So when I had my interview, I remember the interview that I had at the charter school that I worked at for a while. And I said I remember the interview because I was asking some questions and it was hard for them to answer. I think there was a level of accountability that I felt because this is in my community. This school has to be doing something different because this is my home. And so I was asking some hard questions and they weren't able to really answer them. But one of the things that I said was, I need to work at a community school. Are you a community school? What does that look like for you? And they hired me. And even though it wasn't necessarily a community school, I helped to transform it into one. So when I think of a community school, I think of a school that really has a partnership. A lot of times schools come into community and they take resources, right? Or they provide a service to the school, but it's very like in a silo. I mean, they provide services to students, but it's in a silo. So when I think of community schools, I think about two-way partnership. I think about health fairs. I think about Zumba classes. I think about after hours, kids can come and play basketball on the court, or there might be a community festival. I think about schools being at community events and sharing their resources. So it's just a real partnership and understanding, because a lot of times, especially in the schools that we have, teachers are scared to engage in community. They don't live into the community that their students are from. They only come in to go to work, and then they get right back on the highway and don't think about it twice. They don't go to their students' events. They're afraid to see them in the supermarkets, and that's harmful. So when I think of a community school, I think of a school that really has all wrap around support and just really engage deeply, elbow deep into the things that are happening in the community, because communities raise our kids, and recognizing the assets that communities bring for our students.
So you're back home and you're teaching, and the activism, the organizing part of you is coming back home to where it belongs. Tell us about that part.
So, yeah. So one of the first things I did was I connected, or well, my school, they did an anti-racism training. And I was very connected to anti-racism activism because my mother and some of her close friends, they created an organization called Undoing Racism Organizing Collective, which is connected to the work that's happening in New Orleans through the same name organization. And their goal is to bring anti-racism training to people in our community. And we don't make any money. It's a volunteer organization, but they fundraise and they bring the trainers, and they facilitate the space and the food and the trainers so that people can come to the training and get it, because we feel like the anti-racism training and the principles that underline them is probably the most powerful training that you can experience. People do equity trainings all the time, and it's like they check off a box. And sometimes they don't even want to say the word racism, but it's real, right? Anti-Black racism has been like kind of like a foundation of this country and allowed us to get to a lot of the points that we are at today. And so understanding and having real conversations about race and racism is powerful, having a real definition about racism. And so one of the first things that my school did was they sent the students, because it was a charter school. So charters are their own district. So they kind of can make decisions about their schedule in a different way. So they decided to send the students home and have 2 PD days back to back. They had brought people in from the People's Institute for Survival and Beyond from Louisiana or from New Orleans to train the entire staff. It was like 40 people. It was so amazing. But my whole thing is, I already know this training because my mother, we've coordinated it and I've experienced this training multiple times. What's next? So I pushed and I was like, hey, what are we going to do next? How are we going to get people engaged? Before the training, we talked about like how to get the staff on board, and we did things called appetizers, which was trying to like ramping them up for like the training that was coming. And then we talked about after the training, what were you going to do? And it just became like this thing that continued to happen. And I was really engaged in the work. Now, at this point, I'm just a special educator, but I'm doing all of this work to engage the school and community. One thing I love about a charter school is they do allow a lot of people, they want you to engage and they want you to contribute. And so I was able to do a lot of things. Like I organized a parent panel during orientation where parents from the community came and talked about their experiences so that teachers can understand the power of the parent perspective, right? That's one of the most things that teachers are afraid of is calling up, picking up them phones. And it's so important to treat parents as. I also organized like a community walk. And this became a staple. Like every year during PD, staff would have to go into different communities and like collect information about the different assets. Not to look at it as like, oh, they don't have this, oh, this is broken. And from a deficit, what are the assets you saw? And how can we utilize that information to enrich our students' experiences over the course of the year? And I just continued to engage in this work. Eventually, we did an audit, and I was part of that conversation. And eventually, I had to say, y'all got to pay me. It became, well, you're not an administrator, so we're going to go over here to have this conversation. But then we want you to do this. I'm not doing that if you're not compensating me, because now you're using me for my resources and you're using me for my knowledge and my experience and my expertise and my connections, and you're not compensating me. So no, I'm not going to be able to do that. So then the jobs were created. Okay, well, you're going to be our anti-racism professional development coordinator, and you're going to be our equity coach. And it was literally, I'm training all of the staff throughout the year. I'm training all the new teachers. And what's happening as a result is there's a retention, there's an interest, there's a sense of validation. I'm facilitating affinity groups every other month. And the administrative becomes this diverse pool of people that represent actually more closely the students that we serve, because it's like more than 50% of the staff was people of color. As opposed to a lot of these organizations are white women led. It just became such an enriching experience. And at one point, even our executive director, she said, we are an anti-racist organization and that's what we stand for. And it became like, then George Floyd happened and 2020 and racism was the thing. And then all this money comes in and all these opportunities to kind of expand what we were doing. And it was powerful. And it's funny because I was so caught up into it and I was so thankful that this was actually happening. The community walk had expanded. It was like in our 4th year. And at this point, I had added a narrative storytelling component where people from community were telling their stories at different parts. It was dynamic. People were bringing money. They were investing in community spaces. And then what happened as a result of the walk and the storytelling over the year, then all of these field trips popped up. We're going to go here and we're going to partner with this person and we're going to do this. It was so, so amazing. In that I had a couple of Black folks who would be careful, Candice. Don't let them take all your goodies. Don't let them take your stuff. And I remember one of my Black colleagues told me, he was like, I've seen this before, like really just checked out and want to highlight, yes, they doing the thing. Come on, get with it. But then what happens when people who don't experience marginalization, racism, and oppression no longer want to deal with it? You don't have to, because you don't deal with it every day. Our children start dealing with it when they're 4 or 5 years old, right? If I'm a white person, I deal with it when I feel like it. And if I don't think about it, and if I want to turn my attention to something else, then I will. And so during this time, I'm getting all these promotions and getting all these different positions. And eventually I move into the administrative part of education, and I'm a dean and I'm a dean of curriculum, and I'm an assistant principal. The schools decided we're doing something else now. We're focused on, and then it becomes, well, you're not aligned with what we're doing. And there were small moments where I experienced like being pushed back or microaggressions or oppression. And, I dealt with them, like when they said, well, you're not an administrator, so you can't be part of this conversation, or not being compensated, or just these pockets of weird moments that I kind of just dealt with it in the moment. It was painful, but we moved past it. But then it got to a point where the moments just became too much. And I'm still saying we're an equitable organization. And as long as our student population is 90% BIPOC, we need to stay on this path. Well, we're doing something different now. And now we're not aligned. And then it became these other things that were happening. And the more I try to articulate my racialized experience, the more I was pushed back. Well, I'm not getting the training that we said that you were going to give me. You want me to do this? Show me what you mean. Give me a model. What do you mean? We didn't have this meeting. You canceled this meeting. Why are you taking these things off my plate? But then you said that I don't do it, and then I'm in trouble for not doing these things. It became these moments that continue. And then these surprise meetings where it's like, oh, we're in a meeting, but with one person, and there's 3 people in the room that I don't expect to be there. And they're telling me how I'm not doing my job. But I've always brought the same level of excellence. And I've always brought the same level of in processing and trying to understand. And I ask questions to understand, well, you're questioning my authority and you're not listening. It just became like, I felt like I was being gaslit. And it almost felt like maybe they felt like I should have been more thankful. And maybe I wasn't thankful enough. And so it just got to a point where I felt like I was in an abusive relationship. And I felt a real period of grief. Like I was grieving this relationship because I know that it was broken.
It's interesting that you're using the term grief and grieving, because I often talk about, and I think a lot of people could definitely connect with that word of grief around what you thought teaching was going to be, or education, or the people in the building with you, how they were going to show up. And then you realize, oh no, this was all an act. And then the morning, for me at least, the morning of what I thought these people wanted to do, who I thought these people, where I thought we were going to go as a community, the morning of that. And it felt like this whole time was a lie. And what do I do with that pain and that suffering and that grief when everything I thought was true turned out not to be true, right? The term grief is a perfect example, I think, or a perfect word for when folks experience the feeling of disbelief, anger, sadness, like all over and over and up and down when you put so much like heart and soul in a relationship because you thought we were all together on this and we're not.
Two things happened. I felt grief, and then there was a moment. I was encouraged to apply for a fellowship to support my learning. As I was engaging in the fellowship, I felt like I was almost being punished for the work that needed to be done. And at one point, I was on a trip. We went to Denver, Colorado to visit schools and to learn about what great experiential learning looks like and what transformative education could be. And as I'm learning, the more I feel like I'm getting in my own organization, I'm being like pushed out, pushed out, pushed out. And I feel like I'm trying to do everything to be better and to try to really be the best that I could possibly be as an educator and a leader. And while I was there, they made an announcement that I would be leaving the role that I was in and going somewhere else in my absence. And when I returned to the building, I never experienced this in my life. You always hear people talk about it, but I had an out-of-body experience. I literally was dissociating. I felt totally disconnected from who I was. I couldn't believe that was my experience. It was just so painful. After that, it probably was about maybe 3 to 4 weeks after that, I moved on and I left the organization. And I still didn't fully leave education. I had transitioned to a couple of different roles, but I was already a shell. I was a shell. And it was just like me going through the motions. So about a year and a half after that, I taught and I was just like teaching just to teach. And it's like at this point, it's 20 years, it's muscle memory, right? I can do my job. I know what to do. And I still did well. At that point, I went back to elementary school and I taught third grade classroom and the students had amazing results in the course of that year. They did phenomenal. So in a way, I proved that to myself, but I felt like that's it for me. And so that was the moment, but it still took me a little while to ease myself totally out of it. About a year and a half after that is when I left.
When you share a little piece of that story beforehand and you talked about this announcement that you were going to be moving on to a different position while you were gone, it's like so many episodes or so of this podcast, and it just new situations always surprise me. Yeah. So you decided to transition out of a traditional form of teaching, but the organizing heart of you is still there and the teaching heart of you is still there. So what are you doing now?
I'm so happy in what I'm doing now. First of all, let me just say that. So I'm adjuncting. So I do teach English online for college, and I love the experience. I actually teach adults who are building their English proficiency skills so that they can go to like a 4-year program. And I love it. I love teaching them. It's such a great experience. I also teach just English for college level, like freshman English. And I tutor. I have our own tutoring company. I realized that the first time I started tutoring was in Kentucky when my son was 3 years old. He's 20. That means tutoring has popped up here and there throughout my life in the past 20 years. And I was like, girl, what you doing? And so I used to work for another company. It was easier. It's always easy to like contract with another company because they do for you. They market, they promote, they find the clients, but they don't pay at the rate that I feel like I should be paid. So I was like, okay, I'm going to take a leap of faith. And I had some clients that really trusted me and only wanted to work with me. And so I transitioned at the beginning of this year and I started to build my own tutoring company, and it's called the Edututor Hub. So it's high impact online tutoring. It's flexible and it gets results. And I know that because I've been doing it for such a good long time. And because I have all that experience teaching all those subjects, I can provide a range of subjects for my students and I can provide a range of grades for my students because I do have that experience. I also can use my special education knowledge with teaching students who have maybe autism or ADHD and giving them tutoring. They're short. A lot of times, most of my clients choose like a 30-minute time block, but we accomplish so much in that time. And it's very engaging and high energy. And I really enjoy it. So that's where my focus is.
Can you just say the name of your company one more time and how people can find you if they want to reach out and get services?
Absolutely. So I'm on every social media. Well, I'm on Facebook and Instagram and LinkedIn, but you can also go to the website. It is called www.theedututorhub, EDUTUTOR hub.com. and you can go right there and you can schedule an appointment with me, your first free trial lesson where I speak to a family about their students' needs. And I conduct a short lesson just to make sure that the student and the tutor are a fit. And then from there, we schedule and we just get to learning.
Awesome. Thank you. So throughout this journey, throughout this time, you've probably come across as a child, as a teacher yourself, lots of Black educators. And so, including your mom, right? Tell us, is there a Black educator that you would like to shout out?
I always tell people I don't really have a memorable teacher from being a childhood. And I think from being a child, and I think that's why I strive to be that for other students, because I just feel like it can be such a great impact. But I do have a lot of colleagues that I have worked with over the years that I absolutely respect, and I think they're phenomenal. And so I will name some of my colleagues that I work for that I also developed friendships with that are amazing educators. And so I'm thinking of my friend Charmaine Wright, who is currently an assistant principal, and she's so strong and so powerful. And I love how she just doesn't let anything deter her from her goals. One day she's going to open a school, and it's going to be one of the greatest schools that you'll see. And then I have another friend, Jawad Brown. He is an amazing mathematician and he is a phenomenal educator. He brings so much joy to whatever environment that he works in. And I think about him. I think about my friend Tasha Jones. She is just unmatched. She is everything. Like, she is just a powerful, dynamic educator. She is a writer, a poet, spoken word artist, fashionista, and she's just phenomenal. And then finally, I would think about, there's so many. My friend Lucille Germain, who she's no longer in education, but she is beautiful and inspiring, and she brings a sense of possibility to every student that she touches. And finally, I think about Jamil Maldonado, who is currently a high school educator, and she's a Latinx educator, and she has just been in the field for so many years, and she is so powerful and impactful, and she has so many gifts. People just want to just get all her gifts from her. And I tell her, you better keep some of that to yourself. Powerful. But yeah, so I'm thankful for the people who I've worked with. I've learned so much from them. We learn from each other, and I'm constantly inspired. And I think about them throughout my journey.
Thank you. Our last question, my favorite question. For you, what does it mean to be well?
So for me, to be well means to honor yourself and to take care of yourself. I believe in therapy. And I've been on a therapy journey for many years, and understanding that that can shift and change based on your needs, but understanding that it's this important. I also think that being well, just staying true to yourself. That's it. Just staying true to yourself. Like I said, I'm always learning. I'm always seeking. And I think it's because my spirit tells me that there's so much of this world for me to see and experience. And so I try to listen to that and not be afraid of what could be on the other side, because the world is such a beautiful and big place.
Speaking of, we didn't talk about this, but now it's the time. Digital nomad life.
Yes,
So please, this is a part of the wellness, I think. So we want to hear about this.
it
This is
is.
a bonus question.
We are on a digital nomad journey. And for me, what that means is living a simpler life. So it has been a dream that has been years in the making. However, now I'm only months away from it, and I'm so excited. My children are on board with it, and they're super excited, especially my 10-year-old. She can't wait. So I've always had a dream of kind of being working for myself or having a lifestyle that allows me to move wherever I want. And so the goal is, and that's why the edututor business is so powerful, because I have a client in Spain. Okay, we have clients all over the world. We can service people because you can get academic support anywhere because of my online platform. And we're basically on it. We're selling everything. We're selling my house, my car, most of our possessions. And the goal is to have 2 suitcases each and live wherever we want. So we're going to start with in Mexico. And there's 2 main places I'm looking at right now, but we're going to do a world schooling experience. And that allows us to engage in community, but also experience the sense of place that we're in and contribute to the community. Because as an organizer, it's important that I contribute to the community and don't just take resources and take assets away. but that I'm also of service to whatever community and investing and using my privilege to contribute. So my daughter, she'll experience world schooling, and the world schooling, they're like camps, but they're like educational experiences, and they can be from 3 weeks to 3 months. And you go to a place, and it could, for example, Playa del Carmen will have a world schooling hub, and she'll experience cultural enrichment, language lessons, cooking classes, and physical classes. And then we're in community with other families, and we're learning and experiencing together.
I think I heard about this from an Instagram family, a Black couple. They lived in a trailer for a long time, and then they moved to Nigeria, I think it was. But before that, the son, they had put their like 10-year-old son in this, and they were in Spain, I think. I want to say, yeah, this is beautiful. And what made you decide it was time?
Like I said, I've always wanted to do it, but moving away from education. Before I left education, a 12-hour day was just norm, right? 5 to 5, just because I wanted excellence and I had a high standard for myself on what I expected, right? And I wanted to feel prepared for my day and prepared for my students and my staff when I was an administrator. But when you take the space and you're no longer inside of education in that capacity in the public schools, you have space. It just kind of like I call it thawing out. But when you get a break from education, you barely have enough time to thaw out, and then it's time to go back, right? So all of this time has given me time to really fully like thaw out. When I first left, it was like, I want to do everything. I want to do this. I want to do that. I want to do this. I want to do that. But you can't do everything, right? And so now I'm kind of slowed down a little bit, and I'm figuring it out. I'm focusing on one business venture, which is giving me space to do other things because I'm writing again. I'm writing a blog. I published a short story in an anthology. I'm working on a novel. I'm writing curriculum. So I'm writing every day. I'm able to explore. I'm building a business. I'm spending immense time with my family, and I'm engaging in community. Like I'm of service, and I'm doing activism work. So the space that stepping away from education, and I'm still an educator, right? I'm always an educator, but it just looks a little bit different. And it gives me the space to also nurture my other talents and gifts.
Well, folks, another fantastic interview. Candice Renee, thank you so much for coming on the show, for sharing your brilliance, for teaching folks that being a digital nomad is not just for somebody else. And just sharing your story with us. And we will be looking for you and all your photos of your family around the world on all the social media handles. Folks, go ahead and check her out. EduTutor. Make sure that you spend some money. Make sure you get that tutoring from a Black woman. And we'll talk to you later. Peace.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us for today's episode of The Exit Interview, a podcast for Black educators. Every story shared here is a reminder that our wellness matters and that thriving in education is possible when we create spaces of care and belonging. If today's conversation spoke to you, we'd love to keep in touch. You can sign up for our newsletter at exitinterviewpodcast.com or connect with me on LinkedIn to stay up to date on upcoming workshops, consulting opportunities, and ways we're transforming stories into solutions through Alliance Educational Consulting. And before you close out, take a deep breath. Remember that caring for yourself isn't extra, it's essential. Whether you're an educator seeking rest or a school leader reimagining support, you're part of this growing community of care.